Hello, my name is Leah Albright Bird, and welcome to our discussion on child welfare as it relates to the commercial sexual exploitation of children, also known as CSEC. I'm excited to have with me today 3 champions in this movement who work tirelessly to support these amazing kids. To get started, how about each of you introduce yourselves and share a bit about what you do in child welfare here in Los Angeles County?
Hi, my name is Jenny Chung Marino. I'm a law firm director with the Children's Law Center of California. We represent 30,000 foster children in LA County, and my firm specializes in the representation of CSEC.
And my name is Eric Ball with the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services, Bureau of Specialized Response Services. We focus on commercial sexually exploited children, runaways, and our specialty court, Dream Court.
My name is Jewel Copeland, and I work for Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services as a children's social worker in the CSEC unit.
All right, so let's jump on in. So what do advocates mean to you?
An advocate is someone who supports the youth, showing them genuine concern and care. An advocate meets the youth where they're at, listening to them, helping them feel important and heard. And advocates are also in the front lines and in the trenches with the youth, basically walking them through life's journey, what they're going through at the time, building connections, making relationships so that if the youth ends up running away or disengaging from a program, they know who to reach back out to when they're back and need help.
And we talk about advocates and that extra line of support. I think that they're there for the kids at all times, and as a social worker, you don't have the time because you're encumbered by so many other different responsibilities that you don't get the time to spend with the kids, and these advocates are there for them 24/7, and sometimes they're a better contact than we are.
I love that they're consistent, they're familiar faces for our youth. Oftentimes, social workers change, probation officers change, detectives, but there's somebody that they can remember and are consistent and familiar.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the next question I have for you is, could you describe the population of kids who are at most risk of trafficking and trafficking through foster care?
Foster children are one of the biggest populations that are at risk of being trafficked. Those that come from broken families, they lack a father figure, they lack love and a sense of belonging. That's a population that is most at risk to being trafficked.
And I think that a lot of the inner city kids of color are really the ones who are really at risk. I see a lot of our foster kids come from impoverished neighborhoods, and so they come from history of sexual abuse and things of that sort, and so they're more susceptible because of the underlying issues and trauma that they've been through.
And, we like to believe or think that any child is at risk of exploitation, really, but our youth in our foster system, oftentimes they come from families that are broken, or, they desire love and comfort, and these exploiters are offering it to them, so.
Eric brought a good point that a lot of CSEC statistics show that over 60% of them have had some contact with the child welfare system. Wow. So the fact that they were system involved and had suffered multiple traumas, unfortunately have been raped at a young age, would make them more susceptible to being trafficked.
Yeah.
Right. So can you speak to the foster system being the greatest supply chain for trafficked children in the United States?
When you say supply chain, I think we need to look at the system that we work in. A lot of the group homes and foster care providers that are running our short-term residential treatment programs or our temporary shelter care programs are located in inner cities and in some of our impoverished neighborhoods. And so it lends support to some of our tracks, and tracks meaning where street work is done, where kids are being exploited. It's real close proximity to the group homes and foster homes, and so they're prime targets.
And a lot of traffickers actually know where these clients are going, to these temporary shelters. Mm-hmm. And so they're actually waiting for them outside the gates. They easily go into the gates of certain facilities. And clients that are actually in the system going into these shelters are also recruiting each other. And so they're recruiting each other, meeting each other, saying, hey, you're not in a good space, come with me, I'll take care of you. And they're actually leaving these shelters together to go back on the streets.
So how does consistency from a positive, caring adult impact a child in foster care?
Consistency is so important, so impactful. For a client that did not have any caring, loving adult in their life, to now having someone consistently show up, to say that they're going to show up and they do show up, and make them feel important, and heard, and actually helping them fight when they can't fight for themselves. And the most important part is for this caring adult to actually hold hope for the youth when they don't have hope for themselves at this time.
I think a lot of the kids that we work with come from homes where there's been issues of abandonment. And I think that abandonment creates a lot of discomfort for them. And so with a consistent care provider, consistent social worker, consistent advocate, I think that lends support to a progressive process as far as healing is concerned. And so it becomes important that consistency is in their lives.
Well, stability is the goal, and trust is a concept that is hard to grasp. So when you're consistent, you allow the youth to build that trust with you. Very important.
Absolutely. So in light of that, how does PTSD, addiction or self-medication, depression, and coping mechanisms show up in survivors?
From all the clients that we represent, we do see a pattern that they are trying to numb out the pain by using certain substances and being addicted to certain things because it's such a horrific experience that they're going through that they're using these substances to numb out and to not feel anything just to get through the day. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of clients suffering from anxiety and from PTSD.
Yeah, and I think one of the funny things is that we as adults have a tendency of self-medicating. So just think of a kid who comes from trauma. They're really trying to find an avenue so that they don't feel that pain and that trauma that they've experienced. So, we can't blame where they come from. Because like I said, as adults, we do it. And so we got to figure out how we deal with issues in their lives where they don't have to use a medical cure, a drug, or whatever it may be to help them feel better.
And the goal is to work with them, on the substance use and the mental health. But sometimes our youth, they run away often. Those services aren't, available to them on the streets. So they're just surviving the best way they know how.
So when discussing foster care and trafficking, what are some of the terms that you feel harm and terms that heal when we're describing trauma, recovery, and survivors?
Definitely labels. The use of the term prostitute is very harmful. Being judgmental is harmful. And just making certain assumptions, that's why we always want to come from a strength-based approach and not just assume and don't blame and shame the youth.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that there's no such thing as a child prostitute. And so we need to understand that children cannot consent to sex. And so when we use that term, and we're in the process of teaching our law enforcement officers, our social workers, people at every level not to use that terminology because it's degrading. And it's also unfactual. There's no way for a child to consent. So you put that all together, and some of the negative connotations that you hear, even coming from social workers at times, we have to correct that process. And it's an ever-evolving process, because these words have been around for a long time.
They're victims, and they are their own individuals. They have their own stories. They have their own traumas, and we should address them as such. We shouldn't categorize them. Even using the term CSEC youth can be harmful because they do have their own story. They don't want to be grouped into one category.
Sure, and none of us do, really,
Yeah.
right? So what are some of the innovative responses that are effective to prevent trafficking or support victims? What have you seen that works?
Definitely, we're talking about advocates and having an advocacy group that is consistently there, that they are receiving specialized training in order to understand this population. We've also seen that definitely thinking outside of the box works, right? And so in our courthouse, we have about 20 courtrooms. We've now created a specialty courtroom where everybody in that courtroom has received basic CSEC training as well as advanced training. Everybody understands how to work with this population, and we've created systems with other agencies. At the Children's Law Center, we have case managers and attorneys that specialize in working with this population. We collaborate with DCFS, with Eric and Jewel, and they also have a CSEC unit. We collaborate with wonderful agencies like Saving Innocents, where we work together to really have a trauma-informed approach in working with this population. We have multidisciplinary meetings where we're often sharing information that we're gathering from the youth in figuring out best practices for them.
And we've learned over the years that having a multidisciplinary team approach is so much more effective than trying to just do it piecemeal or one at a time or one worker at a time. And we've developed a process with our specialty court called multidisciplinary team meetings, MDTs, which have created a process where all the players are at the table at the same time. So you're not out there by yourself. You know, you're not trying to do all the work by yourself. So that's been really important.
Yeah, and working with our youth, I would say the most important is patience, transparency, and realistic expectations. These youth have experienced false promises over and over and over again, unrealistic expectations. So that's so important. They're going to trust you. They're going to build that rapport with you and that relationship with you.
Programming for this population, we've also created Saturday programs where we'll take clients hiking, paddleboarding, horseback riding, hip hop dancing, painting, and just reminding them that they're kids. You know, not just, as Jewel said, labeling them as CSEC, just reminding them that they're regular teenagers and there's fun out there to be had, and there's important adults that also join them in on these weekend retreats. And we also have a 3-day conference that culminates every year in the winter that also brings all the youth together. And these are different ideas that we're implementing to really try to reach them.
That's great. That's great. So the last question I have for you all is, what would you like the advocates that are watching this training to know about working with this amazing population of youth?
It's hard work, very hard work, but very rewarding. And if you choose to work with this population, you have to show up. If you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. You have to follow through, because you don't want to then be in a place of the previous adults in this child's life, be it a social worker, attorney, or a probation officer that said they would show up and didn't. And so show up with an open heart, be non-judgmental, and just ask simple questions like, how are you doing? You know, what do you need? That's one thing that we always forget, a simple question of asking, what is it that you need today? What can I help you with? And be trauma informed. Try to find the root of the issue. Figure out what's driving this client's behavior and help them with that. Right. Be strengths-based in finding the strengths regarding the youth, help them identify their strengths, and then also empower them to achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm. And I talk about my number one thing is having passion. Just having passion for what you do, because these kids, your eyes are the looking glass to your soul. And so they know if you have passion on what you're doing. They know if you're really genuinely concerned about their welfare. And I see people, and I see sometimes people not putting their best foot forward when working with the population because they get discouraged easily. But this population needs more attention than any of the populations that we work with so far with our department. And so if you don't bring that added passion and that added dedication, you're not going to be successful.
I think just remembering that they're kids, you know, they may have had some adult experiences, but at the end of the day, they're children. They want love, they want stability, and, you know, like Eric said, be passionate about it. And if you're passionate and you show up for them, like they are the most amazing people you will ever meet.
And to take that a step further, I treat these kids like they're my own children. And if you don't do that, they know. They know that you don't have that same, you know, drive as far as getting their lives together. But these kids are my kids, and they're Jenny's kids, and they're Jules' kids. And it's because that's why we do what we do, because we treat them like they're our own.
On a similar note, it's also important to work well with the other service providers. You know, we've known each other for so many years now. We work so well together because representing this population is very difficult. A lot of the things we see, no child should be experiencing this, let alone an adult. Right. And so when we work well together, we can agree to disagree, but we've also formed a village, because to represent this population well, it takes a village. Where we're talking about that one adult first, but many different adults together is going to make the difference. And really collaborating with each other, understanding where we're coming from. And you know, we wear different hats, but at the end of the day, we're here for the benefit of the clients. We want to get them out and help them. And so really having stakeholders get together makes a big difference. Yeah, sure.
So another question I have for you is if you could speak to the issue of vicarious trauma and how you're able to manage vicarious trauma and burnout in your own lives as professionals.
I'll be honest with you, Leah. The vicarious trauma and burnout for me and for my staff, it's real. And it's a work in progress for us, because we often find our clients are in crisis mode. And so it's not just one client, it might be 5 at one time that have AWOL'd, or they've been beat up by their trafficker. There might be another one at the hospital. And so day in and day out, it is a lot. And so we really appreciate a lot of the trainings that have been happening in Los Angeles County to really help us take a step back, set some appropriate boundaries where we can, with this population, but also just really focus on self-care. As an organization, we're really trying to create wellness programs, with yoga, and also go on retreats with our staff to take them out of the line of fire at times, and just to regroup and refresh themselves, because it does take a lot of passion, and we have the passion, but we also have to take care of ourselves in order to sustain doing this work.
Yeah, and funny thing for me is I have 2 young girls, and not that girls are the only ones who are exploited, but it really hits home for me when I see these young girls out here in these streets and they're being exploited the way they are. It hits home for me, so that issue is really tough on me, especially when I see an exploiter face to face. I have a very hard time holding back some of the passion that I have. And so one of the things I think that I have to do is have self-care. Like Jenny mentioned, you have to take care of yourself, because you can come back a mess the next day after you experience some of the tough, traumatic situations or deal with some of the issues that we do. And I do have a staff who sometimes I always say I have like a ticket booth at my desk, because they're one at a time. They're coming because they have issues and they have stuff that's going on. A lot of it is internalized. And so Jewel can kind of speak to that.
It's difficult. Like Eric said, there are children, there are little sisters. They hurt, we hurt. They're angry, we're angry. We have to still hold it together for them. We have to be that example for them, that they can make it and that it is going to be okay. So like Jenny said, self-care is so important. It's so important to go home at the end of the day and reset and take care of yourself, because the trauma is real.
Absolutely. So, Eric, you brought up a really interesting part of the work that you do, and that's the fact that you're a parent. So one of the things that I've come across in doing like burnout and vicarious trauma trainings is a lot of advocates are parents. And so how do you manage how the work impacts you as a parent?
Well, again, it's tough. I think that you have to be able to separate the two. When you go home, you almost have to kind of leave it at work. But there are times, and when you're a manager within my department, you're getting called 24/7. And so there's times where you don't get a chance to decompensate, relax, and you just got to keep going. But that self-care is important. You have to have that extra time for yourself, and whether it be working out, whether it be yoga, whether it be something where you can take that time for yourself. And as an advocate, if you have children, you're in that same boat, because you're providing that care the same way, and you're pretty much 24/7 as well. And so you got to be able to watch yourself as far as self-care is concerned.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. So I'm curious, what are some of the success stories that you've come across when working with this population?
So a success story I would love to share is a client that I probably met about 7 years ago. I was really working behind the scenes because I was an attorney supervisor at the time. And unfortunately, I knew that this young client was being trafficked in Nevada as well as in Los Angeles. And I had helped the attorney at the time really help her engage and receive services. And one day she was in court and actually cussed out the attorney and said, I really don't want to work with you anymore. And knowing this client behind the scenes, I was like, I would just go talk to her. And I recognized that she had a need. She was pregnant at the time, and she didn't have her Medi-Cal card, and she was ready to be done with the system. And so recognizing the need, I asked, can I just help you get that Medi-Cal card reactivated? And that way, if your case is closed, you're gonna have, what you need for the hospital, and that'll be taken care of. And she kind of sized me up and said, okay, that's fine. We had to come back for our next court date, and I told her, you're pregnant, I'm gonna give you a baby box, a baby wellness box. And I think she looked at me like, okay. But when she saw me at the next court date, I think her eyes lit up. And knowing that, I said, I'm gonna do something, and I showed up and helped her. And guess what, that day she said, you know what, I actually am okay with keeping my case open. So then her case was open for the next 2 years. She was able to receive the services on the child welfare side to gain help. I was able to get her a doula. I was at the hospital with her when her baby was born. And her case has since been closed for 3 years, and we're still connected. And as we all know, it's a work in progress, when you emancipate from the system. And so she definitely still reaches out, and I'm still helping her. The next step right now is for her to get a job, and really hoping that she'll do that. And she has 2 kids under her care, and she's doing okay.
Beautifully done. Beautifully done.
One of the things that I always say is that success looks different for this population. At every step, success looks different, and we measure that based on, what they feel they've accomplished, not necessarily what we feel or what we see, quote unquote, as a success. Staying sober for a certain amount of time is a success. not cycling back into the business or into the field or into the street life is a success. So each client has a different success barrier, I say, is that I measure some success by have you successfully gotten re-enrolled in school? Have you done those small things? And so we celebrate those successes because they need that. That increases their self-esteem. And so success needs to be looked at in a different kind of light. Whether it's success we send a kid off to college or whether we got that child off of the streets, there's always a different level of success, but we need to celebrate it so that it increases self-esteem.
I have a really amazing success story. I had a youth, one of my first youth working in the CSEC unit. She was doing very well, going to school, was staying sober. She was previously addicted to meth. And then her boyfriend slash exploiter was released from jail. And she unfortunately relapsed and stopped going to school and started hanging out more with this boyfriend exploiter. But over time, again, the consistency, me showing up, me not giving up on her, people telling her, you know, you can do this, you've done it before, she turned her life around. She realized that that was not a healthy relationship. She was able to get sober. She was able to get transitional housing. At the end of the case, I showed up for visits and she was leading advocacy groups at the group home. Wow. So it's not every case, but when you get a case like that, it warms your heart and it keeps you pushing. And it gives you hope that it's gonna happen one day. It's gonna happen.
That's great. That's great. This has been an insightful discussion. We hope this has deepened your understanding of child welfare and given you vision for best practices in this space. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to our esteemed panel, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this discussion.